Hello, everybody. Good morning. My name is Marco Sonsini, and together with my colleague, Salvatore Governale, I would like to welcome you to this webinar.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us.
This is the first of 3 webinars that we are planning to hold to give you an informed view of how the electoral process is unfolding in Italy ahead of the general election we will have on March the 4th, and also to give you a view of where this electoral process will lead Italy in terms of both political stability and policy agenda. We will now give you a 10-minute presentation. After that, we will be more than happy to answer your questions. We cannot hear from you, but we can read your questions if you write them down on your control panel and send them to us. So we can start the presentation. Let me first very briefly introduce Telos. We are an independent professional consultancy based in Rome, Italy. Our original areas of expertise are lobbying and public affairs, which remain the core of our business. Political analysis accounts for an increasing part of our job, though, driven by an increasing demand from foreign investors for insight of how political dynamics impact on key macroeconomic policy choices.
So the fundamental reason why we are here today is that with approximately 3 weeks left before the 4th of March general election, there are still many questions open as to how the next Italian parliament and the next Italian government will look like as a result of the electoral process. So let's start having a quick look at what we do not know. First of all, we don't know whether any of the competing political actors will actually win a majority in the 2 houses of parliament. In fact, the most likely scenario is a hung parliament, while the second most likely scenario is the center-right coalition winning a narrow majority. Secondly, we don't know who will serve as prime minister after the election. Please recall that we only elect members of parliament. The prime minister is instead appointed by the president of the republic, who will choose someone who is in the position to win a confidence vote in both the houses. And thirdly, we cannot easily project how many MPs each party will elect by simply basing on polls. That's because under our new electoral system, only 2/3 of MPs are elected through a proportional system, while the remaining 1/3 in both the houses is elected in first-past-the-post races. The consequences of this are that we cannot forecast how many MPs each party will elect by simply looking at how they are performing in polls, and that first-past-the-post races will be crucial in determining whether there will be a winner. What we do know for sure is that this voting system benefits center-right parties at the expense of all the others, because they are the only ones that run in a coalition. Together, Berlusconi's party, Forza Italia, its ally, Lega, and other minor allies are projected to take approximately between 36 and 39% of popular votes. But the coalition is projected to win between 50% and 65% of single-member districts. The 2 systems combined may give the coalition a chance to control the next parliament. What we also know for sure is that the 2 largest parties will in no case win a majority. This goes for both the Five Star Movement, which is performing rather strongly in polls and is expected to be the most voted party on the 4th of March, with approximately 27–29%, and for Renzi's Democratic Party, which will most likely take less than 25%, a rather disappointing performance. Both these parties will be severely penalized in single-member districts.
Let's now look at what may happen after the vote. We will consider the likelihood of 4 different scenarios. Scenario number 1, let's assume that the center-right coalition wins a majority in both the houses. In that case, President Mattarella would have no option but to appoint a centre-right prime minister. But the two major allies, Forza Italia and Lega, have not come to any agreement yet as to who is going to serve as prime minister in case of victory. Or better, the only agreement they have is that the PM will come from the party which wins more seats in parliament. This leads us to Lega's party leader Matteo Salvini, in case Lega has the largest parliamentary group within the centre-right coalition, while Berlusconi has not disclosed the name of the person he would recommend to President Mattarella if Forza Italia is in the position to indicate a prime minister from its ranks. Please note that Berlusconi cannot serve himself because he has been disqualified from public offices. When it comes to the policy agenda of a centre-right government, Forza Italia and Lega appear to agree on the need for tax cuts, possibly by introducing a flat tax rate. They also appear to agree on stricter rules on immigration and deportation of illegal immigrants. They also appear to agree on a more assertive defense of the national interest at the EU level on any major dossier that may be put forward by the Franco-German leadership, particularly when it comes to the macroeconomic governance of the Eurozone. Think of the banking union, for instance. The major potential source of instability under this scenario would be that Forza Italia and Lega disagree on where Italy's national interest actually stands, particularly as to whether or not we should be part of the economic and monetary union. In fact, Lega is an anti-Euro party, while Berlusconi has considerably strengthened his ties with the European People's Party establishment, looking for recognition from Berlin, Paris, and Brussels as a responsible leader loyal to the Euro project. We will briefly come back to this in a couple of minutes, but let us first take a look at other possible scenarios in case no centre-right majority emerges from the election. Under scenario number 2, Berlusconi could break up his alliance with Lega and enter an agreement with Renzi's Democratic Party, plus junior centrist partners. This is actually the only chance for Matteo Renzi to keep his party in a ruling majority after the vote, despite the unpopularity of both his party and himself as a political leader. Originally, this was thought to be the most realistic scenario, but it now appears to be less and less feasible as the Democratic Party keeps declining in polls. A majority made up of Forza Italia and the Democratic Party would mean a decisively pro-Euro, pro-EU government in charge. But obviously, its actual policy agenda would need to be negotiated after the vote. Under scenario number 3, Salvini could break up his alliance with Berlusconi and possibly enter an agreement with the Five Star Movement. Arithmetically, this would prove feasible if the Five Star Movement performs strongly and if Lega wins more seats in parliament than Forza Italia. Politically, however, it makes little sense to us. Although there have been talks between the two parties in the past, more recently, Lega's leader Salvini has publicly maintained he is not planning to look for allies outside the centre-right coalition. And he does not seem to regard the Five Star Movement as a reliable interlocutor. This change in Salvini's attitude is probably related to the Five Star Movement proving totally inconsistent on the Euro issue over time, while, as I mentioned before, the Euro is among Lega's priorities. Under scenario number 4, should no other option prove feasible, then political parties may in the end prove available to form a large majority in support of a cabinet with a very limited mission of giving the parliament the time to adopt a new electoral law before having an early election called in a few months' time. A large majority in this case would potentially be open to all parties. We have mentioned that Lega is the only party which has been time consistently advocating for Italy to reacquire monetary sovereignty. This may have puzzled those of you who have noticed that Lega is not focusing its campaign on the euro issue. Very briefly, let me add a couple of thoughts that may help make things a little bit clearer. Lega's program, which is publicly available, by the way, explicitly states that European integration should be reversed and brought back to its pre-Maastricht status, which means in a nutshell a single market with sovereign currencies and no fiscal constraints upon national governments. At the same time, they are aware that a controlled disintegration of the Eurozone is not a realistic scenario any longer, at least in the short run, after Macron defeated Marine Le Pen last year. But they remain nevertheless convinced that the euro is unsustainable and will break up sooner or later. So what they can be expected to do if they are in government after the vote, apart from opposing any step towards further economic and political integration, is to advance measures intended to ensure that Italy is prepared to face any possible euro crisis. Just to give you an example, this includes their proposal for a parallel currency.
Okay, well, looking ahead, we still be able to look at public polls, but only until next Sunday, the 18th of February. And after that date, polls can be taken, but cannot be published. In the next weeks, parties will intensify their efforts, and all major parties will end their campaigns by holding rallies. We already know that Lega will hold its rally in Milan on Saturday, on the 24th of February, but we still don't know if there will be any unified rally of the centre-right coalition. The electoral campaign will end on Friday, the 2nd of March, and on the same day, we will hold our next webinar at 3 p.m. UK time, 10 a.m. US Eastern Time. Thank you very much for your attention, and we are happy to answer some of your questions. You will find more information about us on the next slide of this presentation that we will send you by email in the next days. So I see we have received some questions, so let we be online once again with our videos. So we took some note. The first question we received is, what is the role of the President of the Republic in the process that leads to the appointment of the new Prime Minister? Well, after the vote, as soon as the new Parliament gathers, President Mattarella will meet the heads of the parliamentary groups to understand if there is a majority supporting the new government in both the houses. The President has actually no real margin of discretion in this process if there is a clear majority in Parliament. But if there is no majority, then he can play a role in putting some pressure on political leader, but we don't see President Mattarella exerting this kind of role on political leaders. So he will probably call for new elections, of course, after a new electoral law is approved. So we have a second question. What are the polls saying so far? Well, the polls, according to most recent polls, the center-right coalition is ahead. It may secure a majority of seats, but much will depend on how many single-member districts it will manage to secure, whereas PD is far behind, actually, whereas Five Star Movement will prove the first party in terms of percentage votes it will get, but it will not probably manage to be the first group in Parliament because of the electoral law, which penalizes it.
If I may add one thing, the problem with polls is that polls tell us that the Five Star Movement will probably be the largest, the most voted party, that the Democratic Party will be the second largest party with around 22–23%, while the Five Star Movement is at let's say 27, 20 to 29% of popular votes. They also tell us that the center-right coalition altogether will get probably slightly less than 40% of votes. The problem is that we cannot project how many seats in parliament the political groups will win according to these polls. And this is because, as we were saying before, 1/3 of the seats in both the Chamber of Deputies and the Senate are assigned through first past the post races. And polls are not telling who is ahead, or at least we have very few polls telling us who is ahead in single member constituencies. And we don't actually know how reliable they are. In any case, what we know, or at least what polls are telling us, is that the center-right coalition, at the very minimum, will take around 260 seats in the Chamber of Deputies. The majority is 316. And they tell us that there is the chance that the center-right coalition takes well, let's say a narrow majority. In any case, it would be a narrow majority, but it is a chance. I see there is another question. Is there a majority price if you get more than 40%? No, there isn't. That was the electoral law we had, the so-called Italicum, but it was ruled as unconstitutional. So that's not the voting system we will use on March the 4th. There is no majority prize whatsoever. I think we have probably another couple of questions.
Yeah. There is this one I noted. Can you articulate further on the stance taken by the Five-Star Movement on the euro? And to what extent can Five-Star Movement be regarded as Eurosceptic? Well, actually, Five-Star Movement has never been a Eurosceptic party. In their propaganda, they have never linked Italy's loss of competitiveness to the single currency. They've been critical of fiscal austerity, but they have never linked the fiscal constraints with being part of the Eurozone. For years, they have held that we should hold a referendum on the Eurozone, or whether or not to stay in the Eurozone, but they have never explained why Italy should quit. And they have not explained how Italy could face the financial turmoil generated by the very decision of holding such a referendum on this issue. They've been in the European Parliament, they've been member of the UKIP group, the Nigel Farage's UKIP group. But soon after the Brexit referendum, they asked to be admitted in the ALDE group, which is the most pro-EU political group in the European Parliament. And moreover, during the last year, their priority has been that of improving their reputation towards financial market. As you may know, Mr. Di Maio, who is the leader, the political leader and candidate of the Five-Star Movement, has had a meeting with investors in London some weeks ago, and he was very reassuring in saying that quitting the Eurozone is not a priority for Italy and for Five-Star Movement, but he rather point on smoothing up the process of court litigation so as to make non-performing loans more easily recoverable by creditors.
Okay, so just to make sure we are specific in answering your questions, I see that there is another question asking for actual numbers, actual figures. I think this refers to seats in Parliament. As I said before, figures may not be very accurate at this point, but let's say that as far as the lower house is concerned, the Chamber of Deputies, the center-right coalition is expected to win seats in the range between 260 to 325. While both the Democratic Party and the Five-Star Movement should not take more than 150 to 180 seats each. So these are the figures, and then of course, who will be the question which could prove very, very important if the center-right wins a majority is whether Lega will win more seats than or the other way around. This is not very easy to tell because we don't know who's going to win the first past the post races. In any case, it seems at this point in time, basing on polls, it seems that Forza Italia could win a bit more seats than Lega. But this is not sure at all. I would not bet on this. Then we have another question, I think the last one, on another request to describe Lega's parallel currency proposal in further details. Well, in this case, we are lucky because the person who is in charge of setting up the macroeconomic policy agenda of Lega, with Claudio Borghi, has been rather vocal and articulated on this topic. Under this proposal, the Treasury, the Italian Treasury, would issue so-called mini bonds, meaning state bonds in small, with small denominations below 1,000 euros. And the Treasury would use these mini bonds to pay back the debt accrued by public administrations with their suppliers. And also the Treasury would accept mini bonds as tax payments. So the mini bonds would work basically as notes payable to the bearer. The underlying assumption of this is that in a relatively short time span, a vast majority of economic operators in Italy would accept these mini bonds as a means of payment, even though they would not at all be bound, legally bound, to accept them. Mini bonds issued by the Treasury would not infringe the EU treaties because the euro would still be the legal tender in Italy. When it comes to the actual objective of this proposal, Lega has been quite clear on this. The purpose of mini bonds as a parallel currency would not be that of stimulating investment, stimulating consumption. They would serve the purpose of sheltering Italy from the risk of a liquidity shortage in case of a transition from the euro back to a national currency, back to the Italian lira. As I said before, Lega anticipates that the monetary union is not sustainable and will break up sooner or later. They also anticipate that this will happen, if it happens, in a non-cooperative framework. So their priority appears to be that of ensuring that any Italian government in charge, either willing or forced to quit the Eurozone, is actually able to do so without being threatened by the European Central Bank, basically, with a liquidity shortage, which would obviously deprive Italy of any negotiating power at a very crucial time. So I would say that this proposal fits Lega's broader strategy of getting prepared to tackle any major issue that may arise from a new euro crisis. Well, I hope our answers were clear, or probably we have another. No. We have no other questions for the time being. If there is no other question, we would just thank you very much once again for joining us. And I would also take this chance to remind you that our next webinar will take place on Friday, the 2nd of March at 3 p.m. UK time, 10 a.m. US Eastern I see there is no further question. So thank you very much once again.
Thank you.
And have a nice day. Arrivederci.
Arrivederci.